Gremlins and the Machinery of the Universe, and now we'll jump on that. Tucker closed the door. Let's say the exterior door. The exterior door to the bunker, let's say above ground. The above ground, I believe that's a compound word, yes it is. The above ground bunker that he had all to himself. The metal door clanged closed and echoed back through the hollow interior as sand, blue, gritty, a word that I use all the time, and harsh. Against the weathered metal. He leaned on the door a moment to catch his breath through the filter of the gas mask. Alright. We're establishing a character in a scene here. I saw your comment a moment ago, Frank. I just wanted to get my idea out. I'm out of here was the graphic on the screen when I popped in. Thought I missed the show for a second. Oh, no. Appreciate you dropping in for a second, though. He leaned on the door a moment to catch his breath through the filter of the gas mask. The anteroom between the outside and the place he called home would protect his sleeping area, but he still didn't want the room to pile up with sand or debris. Things were breaking down fast enough on their own. There was an option to take tunnels from his room to the work area without having to go outside. I'm glad I stuck around. Your hair is particularly vibrant today. Thank you so much. There was an option to take tunnels from his room to the work area without going outside. Most days, many days, especially when the winds were high or the rains particularly acidic. Many days, especially when the winds were high or the rains were particularly acidic, he took those tunnels but the hatches took a lot of time, and it was relatively clear today. Enough cloud cover to protect from the sun, but not so much wind as to irritate his in. He adjusted the mask as he covered the distance. Everything read clean today, with no doctor on the site. There was no point in pressing his luck. As if to confirm, the world was degrading instead of healing. The fence line of old chain link was curling up. Let's not say up. Curling at the top and bottom now. Beyond that, he believed more of the distant buildings had fallen, but it was hard to tell. The large towers with their metal and concrete guts showing through the open floor. All right, large towers with their metal and concrete guts showing through the open floors. Seemed to be leaning a bit more in the rising sands. Of course, that could have just been his perception. Of course, that could have just been his perception, and his view of the world was what tipped. He stood at the outer door, looking on the ruins of the world a moment longer. Then he quickly opened and closed the exterior door, entering as quick as he could. All right, Tucker Skip. Now let's use his first name, his whole name up here, and then we'll just use Tucker down there. Tucker Skip left his mask on as he used the vacuums to clean all the dust out of his clothes. The motors in the wall sounded like they were straining. It took a good while to clean up enough to put on the scrubs and to remove his gas mask. Maybe, hold on, maybe the hatches in the tunnels below were faster after all. So he had, sorry, I'm shedding. I actually have to cut my hair for a medical procedure coming up here in about a week. Alright, so he had to admit to himself that he had other reasons for returning outside. There was never anything new to see out there. There was never anything new to see out there, so he wasn't sure what that reason might be. Alright, so we'll just have him be Tucker here. And then we'll do Tucker Skip again. Tucker Skip sat down at his lone computer console. Slid the VR interface over his head and eyes and started his day's work by opening the first report. Scene break. All right. Okay. Ben Whitney drew the shades against the bright sun, blazing out of the clear blue sky over the city. He was too high up in the office tower to hear traffic noise from below, but he was hearing it today anyway. Too many people, he decided. The world was overdue for a plague. Something stronger than the things they had experienced in recent years. A real thinning of the herd. Ben glanced opening. It's out the open door to his office. These were things he'd never say out loud. Not to anyone. Alright, let me make that a split word. Out loud, not to anyone, not even people he mostly trusted. Those kinds of comments, whether spoken or written out on the internet to stay in the record forever. They had a way of ruining a person's life. Couldn't express those sorts of things no matter how much you were clearly kidding. He hated his job, but hated the idea of starving to death even more. Returning his attention to the screen, that bright sunlight still cooked his neck through the narrow window. Okay, returning his attention to the screen, that bright sunlight still cooked his neck through the narrow window and made his screen unreadable. He whipped his head around to see the blinds still closed and doing their job. Okay. Turning back to the computer, the light was low as it should be. Turning back to the computer, the light was low as it should be. And his screen was clear. Weird. Really weird. The sort of weird that if he spoke it aloud, he would be given an undesirable vacation by HR. Ben took a deep breath and got started. This data was not going to analyze itself. Wait. His office didn't have blinds. He didn't close blinds. He pulled shades. But there had been multiple shades instead of one for his single narrow window. Been whipped around again to count just one window with one shade closed. No blinds. Must have imagined it just like he imagined the sunlight sneaking through again. Sitting in this office day after day. Sitting in this office day after day with work that wouldn't matter in a year's time, was apparently messing with his senses. Dog barked somewhere out in the office floor area. Ben kept working. A baby cried. He kept working. The baby got louder, and its screams started to echo as if in some forgotten parking garage instead of a furnished office building. At least the dog had stopped barking. Ben tried to comfort himself with that. Who brought their dogs and babies to the office anyway? No one. No one did. The echoes started to get distorted as the baby continued to wail. Ben Whitney stood up and stepped out into a barren concrete floor where cubicles and desks used to be. The baby gave one more wine that seemed to come from everywhere. The baby gave one more wine that seemed to come from everywhere, and then fell silent. He could see the entire floor with it cleared down to the concrete. He could see the entire floor with it cleared down to the concrete and wires hanging from the missing ceiling. There was no baby, nowhere for it to hide. No dog either. Ben was alone on a floor that had been full moments ago. And no sunlight now either. The windows were blacked out to nothing. There was an empty void where a bustling city had once been. He turned back. Hold on. Make that a new paragraph. He turned back to his own office to see everything gone but cinder block walls. No window anymore. No worries about sunlight blocking out a computer that was no longer there either. Hello? His own voice distorted, and the entire world, what was left of it, digitized before his eyes. Ben Whitney stood in his doorway, his office doorway, staring out at the busy interns, mostly ignoring him. Natural light and gorgeous views of the surrounding buildings lit up everything like a picture in a magazine. Ben had come out here for a reason. But he couldn't remember it now. So he sat back down at his computer to continue the work. He couldn't see with all that natural light pouring in on his screen. Then stood up and pulled the shades to Alright, I'm going to copy and paste this. Doing a slightly different wording. Ben stood up and pulled the shades to protect himself from that. Nope, that's not what I meant to do. From that bright sun blazing out of the clear blue sky over the city. He was too high up. We'll make this a new paragraph. He was too high up in the office tower to hear traffic noise from below, but he was hearing it today anyway. Time to get back to work. Ben stood up and pulled the 3 shades. Okay. Scene break. Okay, why did I go to bold? I don't know. Maybe I'm really excited about this next section. Who knows? Tucker sat on a rock above the slope that led down to a road, which eventually led into the ruins of the closest city. His gas mask. I didn't make that a compound word earlier. I'll need to fix that in one of the spots. His gas mask sat next to him as he ate solid rations out of a packet. No one would notice if he cast those away. Cast the plastic away when he was done. But he needed to recycle it because rations were low. Because supplies were scarce and precious. New food was grown in the surviving pods, but even that had to be processed into rations in order to last. There used to be a road down there under all that sand and cracked hardpan. He was sure of it. Although there was no evidence of it now. Tucker thought he could almost figure out its path based on the contours of the land. He wasn't positive, though. He wondered how far he'd have to dig down to find the road again. If he spent that much time outside, the survivors at Central would contact him with an angry reprimand. Not that any of them would come out this far. Not that they could do anything to him unless they did. Still, even if he was a man unto himself, free to do as he pleased, it did not serve to anger the last humans left on Earth. Life as it was now was certainly isolating enough without all that. The winds started to pick up. Tucker Skip finished off his lunch, collected his mask and plastics, and started back up the slope. Ducking under the bottom curl of the facility fence, he donned the mask again and returned to work. Scene break. Let's actually pull one of those back. All right. Riley Birch stared out the window of her classroom. Say kindergarten classroom. That's spelled with a T. What's wrong with you, Jay? Riley Birch stared out the window of her kindergarten classroom. Wasn't hers exactly. She was a parapro for the kids with special needs. She worked under the actual... I'm here, now you can begin. Oh, good. Oh, good, Armand. That's good. These first 3 pages were just filler waiting for you to get here. She was a parapro for the kids with special needs. She worked under the actual teacher who had a tendency to call Riley out. Oh, thank you for resubscribing, Armand. All right. She worked under the actual teacher who had a tendency to call Riley out for staring off into space or out the window. Okay. Out the window. Staring off into space or out the window. The teacher was quiet for now, at least. So Riley did her best to enjoy it. She liked working with the kids. She thought of her work as important, but it wasn't what she truly wanted to do. If she brought this up to her parents or her sister, they would just scold her for not appreciating her job in this tough economy, or still not growing up and keeping her head out of the clouds. Okay. The clouds were amazing today. They stood perfectly still in the windless sky. I have 2 these in there. I got to get rid of one of them. Got to save some of those these for later. All right. The clouds were amazing today. They stood perfectly still in the windless sky against that bright blue background. They almost looked painted in place. They invited an aspiring artist to capture them on canvas, or even just an electronic tablet. The art programs on those devices were amazing these days. But Riley was stuck in here. So that beautiful scene would be lost eventually. The wind would return and the clouds would move on. But she squinted, hold on, I'll capitalize that. She squinted her eyes at the blurry images on the street. Riley leaned closer to the glass, saw the cars out there frozen in place as well. Wasn't her vision that was blurred. The cars were blurry from being captured in mid-motion. The world was literally frozen. Mrs. Tyler? Riley Birch and the teacher used last names in front of the children. Riley still called her Mrs. Tyler, even in private. She couldn't help herself. Then something moved. Something moved out there. Oh gosh, my back and my side hurt. I managed to hurt myself about a week ago during a different medical appointment, and it is still bothering me. Then something moved out there that should have been comforting, but it wasn't. The men approaching the school wore all black. Looked like body armor. These were not officers. They were not here to help. She couldn't see their weapons, but with everything in the news, Riley and the other faculty were trained to recognize this for what it was. Riley, let's say she again. She grabbed up one of the adult chairs and prepared to jam the leg down into the door handle to block it closed. They'd need to do the same to the other door, and they needed to move the kids to cover. Things could go bad very quickly. Mrs. Tyler, listen to me, please. Mr. Fox is in the building. Do you understand? They're coming this way from outside right now. She started to turn, but then stared at the attackers' faces. It was their lack of faces. They didn't wear helmets or masks. They didn't wear helmets or masks. There was just an empty, dark void where their faces should have been. Riley swallowed twice and turned toward the classroom. Did you hear me, Rebecca? Mr. Fox is in the Mrs. Tyler stood frozen in place, holding out a piece of paper. One of the children reached to take it from her, but they were frozen too. Like the clouds and the blurry cars on the street. Everybody in the room except for her were frozen in time. Well, except for her and the men with no faces coming to do her harm. What's happening here? The room digitized out and resolved itself again. Mrs. Tyler made a comment about Riley staring out the window at the moving clouds. So she returned to help with the students. All right, scene break. Tucker took the tunnels today because he had another duty to perform. The lights rose and fell over him as he passed from one hall to another. He hated that effect. Tucker understood it saved power, but he still hated it almost as much as the process of opening and closing hatches. He finally entered one of the massive below ground storage chambers. Tucker moved from one stasis chamber to another, checking out the withering bodies inside. Tubes and wires ran out of their skin from several points as they slept unaware, barely breathing. Each chamber was within acceptable parameters. Each chamber was within acceptable parameters, as they usually were, but he checked each one anyway. That was his job, and of course these were living people who depended on him and others like him at facilities across the country, across the continent, and maybe the entire globe. The boys at Central didn't share all those details with him. Tucker's job and attention were for this facility and its people only. Once he affirmed the function of the last chamber, he worked his way from hatch to hatch up to the computer room, computer access room. It was his job to see after their dreams too. Okay. Kedman, back from Sweden Rock, saw bands like Accept, Volbeat, Nightwish, Within Temptation, Dropkick Murphys, that's one I know, Opeth, and sadly Guns N' Roses, who was the worst shit I've ever seen live. Yeah, they have a reputation for not being as good as they were in the old days, I'm afraid. But there you go. At least the others made up for it, I hope. It was his job to see after their dreams too. Okay, now we're doing a scene break. Armand, nice. Some great bands you got to see. Figured Armand would have an opinion on that. Sounds like a good concert. Even seeing terrible modern Guns N' Roses is probably a rite of passage everybody should go through at some point. Just to remind us to be happy about the good things in our lives, I guess. All right. Mason Novak had been working from home as long as he could remember. This pandemic was never going to be over. He was a copy editor for Volbeat. Was a positive surprise how good they were. 2 hours, wonderful gig. That's good stuff. Glad to hear you had a good time, Kedman. He was a copy editor for a tech company, so he could do his work from anywhere. He wanted this to all be over, though. He wanted lockdowns lifted. He didn't care for his office space down at headquarters much. He didn't care for his office space down at headquarters much, but he wanted to get out. Wanted to see his friends. But really just to be around people again. He wanted life to be normal. Not bormal, normal. Alright. Wanted life to be normal. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. desk in his home office as he tried to remember what was next. Juan says, never saw them live, but everyone says Volbeat is amazing live. I've seen Dropkick Murphys, and they're always fun. Alright, in his home office as he tried to remember what was next. What day was it? How long had this been going on? He couldn't recall. It felt like forever. He tried to check the date in the bottom corner of his computer screen, but couldn't focus on it. Alright, Dropkick Murphy was fun to see. Volbeat is amazing live. Interesting fact, I saw a cell phone in my dream last night, and that's kind of an ongoing thing that people don't typically see cell phones in their dreams, but I saw one in mine, and it had some kind of virus, and I couldn't open to make a phone call or anything because it kept taking me to some random website that was trying to sell things, and I couldn't get my phone to respond. I couldn't even turn it off. So I'm one of the rare people who actually saw his cell phone in his dream. I'm not sure that's a good thing. Except Singer is an old friend from New Jersey, Mark. He used to be in a local band, TT Quick. All right, he tried to check the date in the bottom corner of his computer screen, but couldn't focus on it. Mason got up from his chair and walked over to the wall calendar. The page, words, and squares had faded beyond recognition. He pulled that sheet and it crumbled to dust in his hands. The next was just as faded. He pulled it, watching it disintegrate. Pulled that next sheet, watching it disintegrate, only to find another unreadable pulp page below that. Ran for the door, but found the knob had vanished. He beat on the door from the inside. He beat on the door from the inside. Beat on the door from the inside and cried for help, even though he knew no one was here with him. Turning to check the windows, he saw there were none. And for the life of him, he couldn't remember if there ever had been. The lights flickered. And he took 2 steps toward his desk again. The keys reached out like tentacles. Okay, let's fix tentacles. They threw sparks and kept coming. Mason backed into the door and slid down its face to sit on his office floor. He groaned and clawed at his own eyes. Scene break. Tucker Skip sat at his computer and swiped through the reports. It was happening again. Same people, new glitches. He thought at first they were simply not accepting the program, that their brains were fighting against it. That didn't seem to be it. Then Riley Mason. Tucker mumbled to himself with the VR headset still on. He swiped at the air and reset their simulations to the last moment before the degradation had set in. Before the degradation had set in, what are we doing here? But it already started decaying again. What is it with you three? I can't happiness. Tucker swiped again and scanned through the code. He didn't want to hard reset if he didn't have to. But there might not be a choice. If this kept happening, it could do some real damage. If this kept happening, it could do some real damage. It could even spread like a virus. As a last resort, he started coding. Maybe you guys need to quit your jobs. It's all a dream. So why not live it the way you like? All right. Tucker stood at the exterior door and breathed harsh through his mask. So how's your health, Jay? I haven't seen you in a while. It's been a couple weeks since I've done some like games and stuff, but I haven't come on to write. Struggling a little bit. I got some things going on. Next week I got some pretty major tests that I got to take care of, mostly looking at brain stuff this time. And I'm going to have to cut my hair because I have a procedure coming up that I could get away with not doing it, but it's going to be kind of a mess because I have to wear this thing on my skull for 3 days, and if I'm not able to wash my hair during that time, it's going to get pretty gross. So probably just going to cut it off before that happens next week. Not sure if they're going to find any answers, but you know, that's how medical stuff goes. Tucker stood at the exterior door. Tucker stood at the exterior door and breathed harsh through his gas mask. He tried to tell himself what he was seeing wasn't real. But he was the only one here, not in a dream. The first building finally cascaded over. As dust erupted upward, it struck another tower, and then another. The three collapsing ruins vanished in a wave of sweeping storm. Tucker unlocked himself from the shocked paralysis. Tucker unlocked himself from the shock paralysis and got the facility door open. He closed it back just in time as the building he was in sounded like it was being battered by hail. From the sounds, many of those pieces that made it this far from the collapses were big and sharp. Okay, let's say he vacuumed himself off and then just sat for a very long time without going in to work on the computers and simulations. It appeared he would be traveling via the tunnels for the foreseeable future. Scene break. Three of them sat in the park with no one else around. Riley Birch painted the clouds and decided to include some of the immaculate city in the foreground. Quitting her parapro job had been a dream come true. Money was tight, but she was getting paid enough for the work she created. Ben Whitney ate his lunch piece by piece, enjoying the bright sunlight on his skin. He had no idea what to do with his life. The idea of quitting had been a whim, but he wished he had done it much sooner. future was wide open. Future was wide open. He could do anything with his life now. For now, he just enjoyed his lunch and the weather. Mason Novak had no memory of the pandemic or any of the other horrors from his home. In the office, in the management, demanded everyone return to the office or quit, he had just quit. He saved the latest chapter of his thriller novel in progress and took a moment to read from the book he had checked out. This was a romance novel. He liked to read outside his genre. The advance hear those birds going nuts out there? His advance on this trilogy paid for his leisure. He was, let me fix that. He was writing fast enough to finish on time. No worries. The three of them took no real notice of each other or the world created around them. Of each other, the world created around them, or the passage of time. He simply enjoyed the lives they had chosen for themselves. Have a good night. Hope to see you on tomorrow. Gotta go and load dishes before the wife gets home. Alright, have a good one, Armand. They simply enjoyed the lives they had chosen for themselves, with no knowledge, concern, or worries about buildings falling in a decaying world where sand covered everything. And one man. Alright. The three of them took no real notice of each other, the world created around them, or the passage of time. They simply enjoyed the lives they had chosen for themselves with no knowledge, concern, or worries about buildings falling in a decaying world where sand covered everything. And one man tried to maintain their bodies, their sleeping bodies, and their dreams. All right.